In the twilight of Middle-earth, when the song of the firstborn had begun to dim, and the long years of their dominion waned like the last notes of a fading harp, there stood the memory of glories older than the world of men could recall. The elves had walked beneath the stars before the rising of the sun, and their wisdom and beauty had shaped kingdoms now dwindling into shadows. Rivendell still sang, Lothlorien still glimmered beneath its golden leaves, but the tide of time moved ever onward, and even the most timeless of realms could not resist the slow withdrawal decreed by fate. For every bright tower and hidden sanctuary there was already a silence gathering, a hush of departure toward the far shores of the west. It was in this dimming age that Arwen Aragorn was born, daughter of Elrond half-elven, granddaughter of Galadriel the Wise, and last bright jewel of a people fated to vanish from Middle-earth. Her name meant Evenstar, and it was not given lightly. She was to her kin the final gleam of radiance in a darkening sky, a living reminder of ancient beauty at the very hour it prepared to pass away. To look upon her was to glimpse both wonder and grief, for in her presence the elves saw what they had been and what they were losing. To men she was a vision scarcely believed, more dream than flesh, as though some remnant of the elder days had stepped into their brief and fragile hours. Yet Arwen was not merely an image to be cherished. She bore in her veins the mingled fates of elves and men, the same lineage that once joined in the union of Luthien Tinuviel and Beren One Hand. In her the echo of that ancient tale was renewed, though she herself could not yet know the full weight of its consequence. The twilight in which she walked was no mere passing of years, but the convergence of histories. Sauron still gathered his strength in secret, his malice stirring from the shadows of Mordor, while the free peoples drifted toward disunion. Gondor had grown weary and leaderless, its throne empty, its stewards ruling in diminished grandeur. The northern Dúnedain wandered as exiles, their kingdom long fallen, their glory but a whisper carried in lonely halls. The elves withdrew into silence, their songs recalling past triumphs rather than proclaiming new hope. The world waited, though few understood for what it waited. In Rivendell, Elrond held counsel and guarded wisdom, steward of a house where lore of all ages was gathered. He knew the peril that approached and the price that would be demanded. For though his daughter was radiant, she was also bound to choice, as he himself had once been. The half-elven carried in their blood the power to bind their destiny, either to the immortal elves or to the fleeting lives of men. Elrond had chosen to remain with the firstborn, yet in his heart he knew his daughter's future might not echo his own. To grant her hand was to bind the fate of his house, and perhaps of all Middle-earth to a path of sorrow and consequence. Yet destiny moves not only in high halls or through councils of the wise. It weaves quietly, thread by thread, until lives are drawn together in patterns unseen. Arwen grew to maturity beneath the eaves of Rivendell, her beauty deepening, her spirit calm and luminous. Those who looked upon her believed the ancient light of Valinor still dwelt in her eyes. Travelers who found refuge in Elrond's house spoke of her as though she were a figure out of song, and indeed the echoes of Luthien were in her face and form. That likeness was no accident of memory but a sign, though signs often reveal their meaning only in hindsight. The twilight deepened. Ships slipped westward from the grey havens, bearing kin across the sea to lands unmarred by time. In Lothlorien, Galadriel guarded her golden realm, but even there, the shadows lengthened and the certainty of fading could not be denied. Middle-earth was preparing itself for change, though whether it would find ruin or renewal no voice could yet declare. Against this backdrop, the figure of Arwen shone as a contradiction, immortal in grace, yet poised at the brink of mortal choice. She was the last light of the firstborn's long tale, but she was also something more, a bridge to what would come. For though her story begins in twilight, It is not merely a lament. It is also a promise that the old can give birth to the new, that even in decline there is the seed of transformation. Arwen's life would not remain enclosed within Rivendell's guarded walls, nor her fate confined to the sorrow of her people's departure. Beyond the borders of Imladris walked one who bore a hidden name, a mortal whose life had been veiled in secrecy and danger since birth. His bloodline was stained with both shame and hope, his future bound to a crown that lay shattered among the ruins of Gondor's past. He wandered, unknowing that his steps would one day bring him into her gaze. Thus, in the waning age, two destinies began their slow convergence. She, the even star, radiant amid the fading of her people. He, the hidden heir, carrying in silence the broken legacy of kings. Neither could foresee how their lives would intertwine, nor how their love would demand of them sacrifices that echoed across millennia of legend. Yet already the threads of fate were drawing them together, as the twilight hour prepared to hand its burden to the dawn. Before the tale of their meeting can be told, the path of the man must be traced, for no love may be understood apart from the life that bears it. The world would one day know him as Elisar, the Elfstone, king of the reunited realm. But he was not born to glory. He was born to exile, to wandering, to a hidden childhood beneath the roof of Elrond, where his true name was veiled for his safety. He would not meet Arwen as a prince crowned with power, but as a man untested, carrying only the weight of destiny and the long patience of endurance. It is in the shadow of such beginnings that their love story took root. Yet to grasp its depth, we must first walk the roads of his hidden youth, see the burdens he carried, and learn how the heir of Isildur came to manhood. For only then does the meeting of Evenstar and exile reveal its full measure of consequence. And so, from twilight we pass into secrecy, from the daughter of Elrond to the last hope of men, whose steps will soon cross hers beneath the trees of Rivendell. He was born in secrecy, his life veiled from the eyes of friend and foe alike, for the line he carried was both blessing and curse. Aragorn, son of Arethorn, came into the world in the twilight of the Dúnedain, when the scattered heirs of Númenor wandered as rangers through northern wilds, their kingdom long fallen, their name known only to the wise. His father perished early, slain by the arrows of orc kind, and his mother Gilren fled with her child to the safety of Rivendell, where Elrond Half-Elven received them with grave foresight. To the boy the valley seemed eternal, its waterfalls and halls of song a sanctuary untouched by shadow. But he did not yet understand that he was being hidden, guarded not for his own sake alone, but for the destiny that stirred within his blood. Elrond named him Estel, which in the tongue of the elves meant hope, and under that name he was raised, unaware of his lineage. For long years he grew in wisdom and strength, fostered in a house where lore and music mingled, and the ancient tales of elves and men surrounded him like the air itself. He learned the healing arts, the tongues of many peoples, and the ways of the wild. Tall and keen of sight, his heart was noble, but in those years he bore no crown, wielded no authority, and knew nothing of the heavy burden that would one day rest upon him. In Rivendell he was a child among legends, a mortal growing to manhood among those who seemed unchanging. The broken sword lay there also, in Elrond's keeping, shards of Narsil that once cut the ring from Sauron's hand. To Estel, the relic was an object of awe, its history told in whispers, but he could not yet claim kinship with it. He did not yet know that his fate and the fate of that shattered blade were one and the same. Around him the songs of elves recalled ages when men and Eldar stood side by side, but those ages felt remote, stories more than truths, and he lived content in his ignorance, thinking himself merely a foster son of Elrond's house. Time, however, is a patient revealer, and as he grew in stature, Elrond saw that the moment of truth could not be delayed forever. When he had reached his 20th year, the veil was lifted. The Lord of Rivendell brought him into a quiet chamber, where the relics of his line were laid before him. The shards of Narsil, the ring of Barahir, symbols of a kingship long forgotten yet never extinguished. Elrond told him at last who he was: Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Isildur, last hope of the Dunedain, and destined for a crown that had lain vacant for centuries. The revelation fell upon him with the weight of mountains. Estel was no longer merely a name of comfort. He was hope itself embodied in mortal form. With this knowledge came the shadow of his forefathers' failure, for it was Isildur who, in pride, had kept the ring and brought ruin upon his house. The blood of kings ran in him, yet so too did the memory of weakness. To accept his heritage was to accept not only honor, but the burden of redemption. Elrond spoke also of peril. If his identity were known, the enemy would not rest until he was destroyed, for Sauron feared above all else the return of the kingly line. Thus secrecy remained his shield, and wondering his lot, he could not linger as a lord within Rivendell, nor dwell in comfort while shadows grew. His path must be one of exile, learning the harsh ways of the world he was born to serve. To prepare for kingship he must first endure obscurity. In the quiet after that revelation he walked the gardens of Rivendell with a changed heart. He looked upon the elves with new eyes, perceiving their wisdom as a treasure he must carry into mortal lands. He looked upon the relics of his people and felt their silent plea for renewal. Yet above all he bore within him the knowledge that his life would not be his own. It belonged to a destiny stretching back to the dawn of Númenor. It was during those days of new awareness that his eyes first truly beheld Arwen Aragorn, though she had dwelt in Rivendell all along. She seemed to him like a vision from the old songs, the living likeness of Luthien Tinuviel, whose tale he had long cherished. At once his heart was bound, though he dared not yet speak of it. The sight of her did not merely stir desire, but deepened his sense of destiny, for it felt as though his lineage and her beauty had been destined to meet. Yet even in the brightness of that first love, he knew the peril, the gulf between mortal and immortal, and the stern gaze of Elrond, who foresaw what union might mean. For now his love remained secret, folded within him like a hidden flame, as he turned outward to face the road that lay before him. To claim Arwen's hand, if ever it could be, he must prove himself not only in valor, but in kingship, uniting kingdoms long sundered and standing against the shadow rising in the east. The knowledge of his heritage became both a sword and a chain, binding him to burdens no man would willingly choose. Yet he accepted them, for within him was a will of iron, tempered by years of patience. He departed Rivendell in the guise of a ranger, nameless among the free folk, carrying his secret as a hidden crown. He roamed far and wide, serving in the north, riding under false banners in the lands of Gondor and Rohan, fighting in wars that no chronicler would name him in. His deeds were many, yet always unseen, for the time had not yet come for revelation. Through it all, the memory of Rivendell remained within him, and the image of Arwen shone as a star guiding his steps. In the wilds, amid danger and weariness, he carried her presence as though it were a banner unseen. Yet distance and silence were heavy companions, and he did not know if his hope would one day be fulfilled. Thus the hidden heir became a wanderer, bearing the legacy of kings yet known to none. His life was a long preparation, his heart tethered to both destiny and desire. And as he walked in shadow, the world around him slid toward greater peril, for Sauron's strength gathered and the time of testing drew near. Before that test could come, however, another voice would shape his path, the counsel of Elrond, who watched with stern foresight the love blooming in secret. For though Aragorn had learned his heritage, the question of worthiness remained. and Elrond would place upon him a condition that would test not only his strength, but the endurance of his heart. Long before Arwen walked in Rivendell's twilight gardens, or Aragorn bore the secret name of Estel, another tale had been woven into the fabric of Middle-earth, a story so ancient that it lived not only in the songs of elves, but in the very memory of the world itself. It was the tale of Luthien Tinuviel and Beren One-Hand, the first great joining of immortal and mortal, a union that defied the decree of the Valar and reshaped the destiny of both their kindreds. To understand the weight upon Arwen's heart and the peril within Aragorn's hope, one must first walk through the shadowed paths of that older legend, for it became a mirror by which all who came after measured their choices. Luthien was daughter of Thingol, king of Doriath, and Melian the Maya, whose wisdom and power had girded the land with enchantment. She was fairest of all the children of Ilúvatar, her song causing flowers to bloom and shadows to flee. Beren was a mortal outcast, hardened by grief, his father's house fallen to the claws of Morgoth's servants. When their paths crossed in the glades of Doriath, he beheld her dancing, and in her he saw the light of life renewed. Their love sprang in defiance of walls and decrees, for Thingol her father demanded a bride price impossible, the recovery of a Silmaril from the crown of Morgoth himself. Thus the story unfolded as both trial and wonder. Beren, with Luthien's aid, passed through dread halls and blackened dungeons. It was her voice, not his blade, that subdued the darkness, for she sang before Morgoth and cast him into slumber. Together they took the Silmaril, though at a terrible cost. Beren lost his hand, and later his life, and Luthien's heart was broken. Yet her sorrow was not the end, for she descended into the halls of Mandos, where none had ever swayed the Keeper of the Dead. There she sang of love and grief, and her song moved even the most pitiless judge to pity. For her sake, and because of the depth of her devotion, Mandos allowed her to return to Middle-earth with Beren, but only if she would forsake her immortality. She chose to be mortal, and thus her line was forever joined with the fleeting fate of men. That choice reverberated through the ages. From their union descended Elros, brother of Elrond, who chose mortality and became the first king of Númenor. Through Elros's line came the great kings of men, their lifespans long but their doom inexorable. Aragorn himself was their heir, and in his veins ran the mingled legacy of elves and men, all tracing back to Lúthien's fateful choice. And from Elrond came Arwen, who bore her likeness more than any who had lived since. To gaze upon her was to see not only the beauty of the present, but the memory of the ancient past. She was not merely Elrond's daughter, she was Lúthien's echo, the second even star to rise in a time of fading. Thus, when Aragorn looked upon her in the gardens of Rivendell and thought her Tinuviel returned, it was no mere youthful fancy. It was as though history had bent upon itself, repeating its patterns with subtle difference. He, like Beren, was mortal, an outcast king without throne or land. She, like Lúthien, was bound to immortal kin and enclosed by the wisdom of her father. Their love was not only their own, but the reenactment of an archetype older than they could remember. But where Beren and Lúthien had won their joy by deeds of impossible daring, the question remained, what price would Aragorn and Arwen be asked to pay? For every echo carries with it both resemblance and divergence. Elrond, who remembered the tale more keenly than most, did not forget its sorrow. He knew what it meant to choose mortality, and he had watched his own brother depart down that path, never to return. To see his daughter's heart stirred toward the hidden heir of Isildur was to see again the shadow of that ancient bargain, and his foresight told him it would demand no lesser sacrifice. Among the elves, the story of Beren and Lúthien was sung with both joy and lament. It was proof that love could bridge the gulf between immortal and mortal, but also that such union was costly beyond measure, for Lúthien's choice marked the first departure of an elf from the undying fate of her people, a wound upon the long history of the firstborn. Some saw it as glory, others as grief, but none doubted its power. In Arwen that wound was remembered, and in Aragorn its fruit stood before the world. So it was that the burden of precedent pressed upon them. Arwen's likeness to Lúthien was not only in beauty, but in fate, and Aragorn's heritage bound him to the consequences of her choice. When their hearts inclined toward one another, it was not as two who discover love in isolation, but as inheritors of a pattern already written. Their story was their own, yet it was also an echo, and echoes do not fade until they are answered. In this knowledge, Aragorn's hope became a thing both luminous and perilous. To love Arwen was to step into the very shape of Beron's tale, to claim its mantle and risk its sorrow. To receive her love was to accept that she might choose as Lúthien chose, binding herself to mortality for his sake. It was no light gift to receive, for it carried within it the shadow of grief yet to come. Still, the echo gave strength as well. If Beren and Lúthien had prevailed against Morgoth, could not their descendants also prevail against the shadow rising once more in Mordor? If love had once reshaped the doom of the world, might it not again? These questions lingered unspoken between them, hovering in the silence of their glances and the unspoken weight of their vow. Thus the tale of Arwen and Aragorn cannot be told without the echo of Lúthien and Beren, for it is in that echo that their love found both its shape and its trial. The Even Star was not merely beloved for her beauty, but for the memory she bore. The Hidden King was not merely heir to a throne, but to the hope kindled by Beren's defiance. In them the past lived again, yet the future demanded its own accounting. As twilight deepened in Middle-earth, the Song of Lúthien was remembered not as a distant legend, but as a living shadow, guiding and haunting the steps of her descendants. And as Aragorn's gaze lingered upon Arwen, he knew that what had once been chosen in grief might soon be chosen again. But before love could ripen into union, the measure of worth must be tested, for unlike Beren, who faced Morgoth's fortress, Aragorn would be called to face a shadow subtler and wider. The dominion of Sauron returned, and before he could claim Arwen's hand, the judgment of Elrond would stand between them, a condition rooted not only in wisdom, but in the memory of Lúthien's costly choice. The gardens of Rivendell lay steeped in twilight, the air heavy with the scent of evergreen and the quiet murmur of falling water. There, beneath the silver branches and the lantern light that never wavered, Aragorn first truly beheld Arwen Undormiel, not as a fleeting vision glimpsed among the halls of Elrond, but as though destiny itself had led his feet to the place of revelation. She walked alone, her step silent upon the moss and stone, and her hair flowed like dark rivers in the dim light. To him she seemed both near and untouchable, a figure belonging more to dream than to the waking world. And in his heart the memory of Lúthien's tale returned with a force so sharp that he could scarce breathe. For here before him was that likeness renewed, not in song but in flesh, the ancient story reborn in the quiet hush of his own lifetime. Arwen turned, and her gaze fell upon him without surprise, as though she had known he would stand there, as though his long-hidden name and burden were no secret to her. To Aragorn, the moment struck like a chord of fate, resonant and inescapable. His heart was pierced, not with sudden desire alone, but with the recognition of something far deeper, a bond written long before his own birth, perhaps even before the rising of the sun. He bowed his head, unable to speak, and she smiled with a grace that seemed to draw all light toward her. In that meeting, fragile as it was, the future trembled into view. He, mortal and untried, carried a destiny larger than his years. She, immortal and serene, bore within her the weight of countless ages, Between them stretched the gulf of two natures, the doom of mortality set against the endlessness of the elves. Yet in that garden, none of it mattered. They were not symbols of fading kingdoms or heirs of ancient burdens, but simply two souls who recognized one another. The garden became a circle of silence, a space where the noise of history fell away, and only the present endured. Still, beneath the beauty of that moment, ran an undercurrent of foreboding. Aragorn's heart, though uplifted, knew the impossibility that surrounded him. He had only just learned of his lineage, only just stepped into the burden of Isildur's heir. He possessed no throne, no realm, no power beyond his will and his courage. To reach for Arwen, the even star of her people, was to reach for the highest star in a night sky already vanishing. Yet the sight of her compelled him beyond caution. He loved her from that hour, not as one loves a passing flame, but as one loves the breath of life itself. Arwen, for her part, saw in him more than the young man he appeared to be. She saw the long years of hidden endurance that had already shaped him, and the echo of Elros, brother of her father, whose mortal choice had once divided their line. In Aragorn's face she beheld the shadow of kings, and though his path was yet unwritten, she recognized the strength that would carry him through it. To her, he was not merely a wanderer, but the one whom fate had placed before her at the hour when twilight deepened most. They spoke little in that first encounter, for words seemed fragile against the weight of what passed between them. A few questions, a few replies, nothing more. Yet in the silence that followed, each knew that something had changed. The world beyond Rivendell still moved toward peril. Sauron's shadow lengthened, kingdoms faltered, and the free peoples drifted. But within the quiet circle of that meeting, the seed of a love was planted that would alter the course of history. Aragorn returned to his chamber with a heart both exultant and burdened. He lay awake through the night, the vision of Arwen's face burning in his memory. He remembered the songs of Luthien, and it seemed to him that her tale was no longer a legend confined to ancient halls, but a living thread running now through his own life. And with that memory came fear, for he knew the cost of that ancient love, the forsaking of immortality, the grief of separation, the sorrow of inevitable loss. Could he, a mortal bound to dust, ask such a price of one so radiant and eternal? Could he dare hope that her heart might incline toward him as his toward her? Arwen, too, lay in quiet thought. She had lived centuries, her life measured in ages rather than years. Few things surprised her. Yet in Aragorn she had seen something that stirred her heart. It was not only his bearing, noble though it was, nor his eyes, keen with hidden strength. It was the sense that in him the line of Luthien and Beren was renewed, that the sacrifice of old was not in vain but had borne fruit in this mortal heir. She had long known her path would carry her to a choice, though she could not yet see its shape. In Aragorn's presence that choice began to rise like a horizon glimpsed through mist. Thus, their first meeting was no ordinary beginning but a moment weighted with prophecy, a thread tying past to present, legend to living. The world did not pause to honor it. The rivers still ran, the stars still shone, and the wars of men and elves continued beyond their knowledge. Yet in that quiet exchange, destiny shifted. For if they had not met, the line of kings would not have been renewed, Gondor would not have risen again, and the age of men might have faltered before it began. The days that followed did not immediately yield courtship or vows. Their love grew in silence, nourished by glimpses, by quiet conversations, by the unspoken knowledge that each bore the other in thought. Rivendell itself seemed to guard their secret, its halls echoing with music that wove longing and hope into the air. Yet shadows stirred as well, for Elrond, in his wisdom, perceived what was awakening, and his heart was torn. He loved his daughter beyond all else, and he foresaw the sorrow that her choice might bring. To give her hand to a mortal meant parting, grief, and the slow fading of a light he could not bear to lose. But for Aragorn and Arwen, the garden encounter had already set the course. Their paths would wander, their burdens would grow heavy, and long years of trial lay between them. Yet no distance, no silence, no command of father or decree of fate could undo the recognition that passed between their eyes beneath the twilight branches. Love had begun, and though tested, it would endure. In this moment, however, their story remains poised at its beginning, fragile and luminous, untested by the weight of the world. The question still lingers: how would Aragorn, the hidden heir, prove himself worthy, not only of a crown, but of the even star herself? To answer this, we must follow him as he departs Rivendell and begins the long years of wandering, where the strength of his character would be forged upon the roads of exile and the fields of war. When Aragorn left Rivendell after those first days of awakening love, it was not with the assurance of a prince departing to claim his birthright, but with the solitude of a wanderer vanishing into shadow. His heart had been stirred by Arwen, and his soul had been bound to her, as surely as the ancient tale of Beren had been bound to Lúthien. Yet he carried also the knowledge of his mortality, the burden of a heritage broken by failure, and the stern, unspoken gaze of Elrond, who had seen in that budding love both beauty and peril. If he would ever be worthy of her, he must prove himself in exile, enduring trials that would strip away all pretense and forge him into more than a man. So he departed the sheltered halls and quiet gardens of Rivendell, and began the long roads of the Ranger. The northern wilds knew him first, the scattered lands of Arnor, where the Dunedain still watched in secrecy. Among them he passed in disguise, learning their craft, guiding the few who still bore the memory of kingship. He hunted the servants of the enemy who crept into lonely villages, and his blade was drawn in defense of those who scarcely knew his name. He took no titles, demanded no tribute, and received no songs. Yet his deeds spread quietly, whispered by farmers and wanderers who spoke of a tall man with keen eyes, a captain without banner who brought safety where none had been expected. From the north he journeyed farther, crossing mountains and rivers, serving under other names in the realms of men who did not know they harbored their true king. In Gondor he was known as Thorongil, the Eagle of the Star, and there he fought beside the steward's men. His counsel was wise, his leadership sure, and in time he commanded fleets and armies as though born to the task. Yet when victory was won, he did not remain to claim honor. He vanished as silently as he had come, leaving behind only the memory of a captain whose loyalty was to no throne visible. Thus he moved through the world as shadow and light together, preparing himself for a destiny that lay still far ahead. Through Rohan he passed also, serving its kings, learning the ways of the Horse Lords, and winning their trust. He became friend to Gandalf, who perceived more clearly than others what lay concealed beneath the guise of the Wanderer. Gandalf, alone among the wise, understood that the love between Aragorn and Arwen was no idle affection, but a thread in the tapestry of fate. He spoke little of it, but in his counsel there was encouragement, as though he too believed that what had once been accomplished by Beren and Lúthien might yet be fulfilled in their descendants. Years flowed like rivers, and still Aragorn wandered. He walked the forests of Mirkwood, where the shadow deepened and the servants of Sauron stirred in secret. He roamed far to the south and east, to lands beyond the knowing of most free folk, where the tongues of strangers filled the air, and the banners of strange kings flew above hot deserts. In all these journeys he learned patience, he learned command, and he learned the loneliness of bearing a hidden name. For always, within his heart, the image of Arwen remained, brighter than any jewel or crown, and though he spoke her name to no companion, She was the quiet star by which he measured his path. But the years of wandering bore cost. He was hardened by sorrow, weathered by battles that none would remember, marked by dangers from which no minstrel would craft songs. His body bore the scars of arrows and blades, and his spirit carried the weight of choices made in silence. For a man who loved so deeply, his life was lived in absence, for Arwen was far away, and each year stretched like an age. Yet he endured because to endure was itself a proof of worthiness. The wild lands whispered also of another burden. Wherever he went, he found the enemy's hand at work, subtle and slow, preparing for the great return. Sauron's servants moved like shadows across mountains and plains, stirring disquiet among kingdoms already weakened. Aragorn, though nameless, became a hunter of these threats, a silent resistance against the rising tide. Yet he knew that the day would come when secrecy could no longer suffice, when the crown hidden in exile must at last be claimed if Middle-earth were to be saved. He returned at times to Rivendell, weary from the long years, and in those rare moments he saw Arwen again. Each meeting was brief, yet heavy with unspoken devotion. They did not speak of promises openly, for her father's eyes were upon them, and Elrond's wisdom did not yield easily to love. Still, each glance between them carried the weight of eternity, and each silence between them was filled with meaning no words could capture. Arwen too knew that the years of waiting were shaping him into the man he must become, though her heart felt each season as a quiet sorrow. Thus Aragorn's wandering became both burden and preparation. He was tested in solitude, in loyalty, in endurance, and in secrecy. He had walked more roads than most mortals could imagine, and through it all his love for Arwen remained unbroken. It gave him strength when he might have despaired, and hope when shadows pressed too close. Yet the question lingered in his heart. Would the long years of exile be enough to win not only her hand but the acceptance of her father, and the worthiness of a king returned? The broken sword still lay in Rivendell, waiting. Its shards were as his life, fragments of a legacy scattered by ruin, not yet reforged into power. He knew that one day his hand must wield it, and that day would test more than his strength. It would test whether he had indeed been shaped by wandering into one who could carry both crown and love without faltering. Until then he endured step by step, road by road, with Arwen's memory as his only banner. So the hidden heir became not only a ranger but a legend in silence, a man known across lands by names not his own. His long roads were not wasted, for they tempered him as fire tempers steel, and though he had not yet returned to claim the reward of his endurance, the foundation of his kingship was being laid in the soil of exile. The world had not yet seen him for who he was, but destiny moved inexorably toward the hour when concealment would end. Yet before that hour could arrive, the stern wisdom of Elrond would stand before him. For the father of Arwen did not look upon their love as mere affection, but as a choice heavy with consequence. And Elrond, remembering both the sorrow of Luthien and the doom of Elrons, would place upon Aragorn a condition as unyielding as stone. To win Arwen's hand, he must first reclaim the throne of Gondor. In the high halls of Rivendell, where the sound of falling water mingled with the music of harps, Elrond half-elven watched his daughter with a heart divided. He had seen the glance in her eyes when she beheld Aragorn, and he had read the quiet certainty in Aragorn's gaze when it lingered upon her. For centuries he had kept her safe, even star of his house, the last bright flame of his line. Now he foresaw that flame bending toward a mortal's life, and his foresight, deep as the roots of mountains, told him what such a choice would demand. He had lived too long and seen too much not to know that love between mortal and immortal was never without cost. Elrond remembered his brother Elros, who chose mortality and became the first king of Númenor. He had loved him dearly, but their paths had divided forever, one bound to the swift passage of years, the other to the unbroken continuity of elven life. He had felt the grief of that parting as though it had torn his soul in two, and he had carried that wound through ages uncounted. Now the same shadow loomed again, not between brothers, but between father and daughter. If Arwen chose as Elros did, she would be lost to him. He would endure ages beyond her span, walking still in Middle-earth, or perhaps sailing to the undying lands, but she would lie beneath mortal earth, her light extinguished in time. This grief too he foresaw, and it weighed heavily upon him. When Aragorn returned from his long wanderings, hardened by exile yet carrying still the same devotion, Elrond spoke at last. He called him to his chamber, where relics of past ages rested in silence, and his voice was grave as stone. "Aragorn, son of Arathorn," he said, "I see where your gaze falls, and I know the love you bear my daughter. Yet you are mortal, and her choice, should she bind herself to you, is no light matter. If she cleaves to you, she forsakes the life of her people, and her years will be counted among men. That price is grievous, and its sorrow beyond the healing of this world." Aragorn did not falter, though his heart trembled within him. He answered with steady voice, "I know the cost, though I cannot yet weigh its depth. Yet my love is unshaken, and my will is to be worthy of her, though the road be long and full of peril." Elrond's eyes, deep with centuries of memory, softened for a moment, for he respected the courage he saw. Yet wisdom, not sentiment, guided him. "If indeed you would be worthy, then you must not approach her as one who offers only love without strength. She is not for any man less than the mightiest of kings, nor will I consent to see her fate joined with one who has not restored what was broken. Therefore I lay this condition upon you. Until you sit upon the throne of both Gondor and Arnor, you shall not wed Arwen Undormiel. Only as king of the reunited realm shall you claim her hand, for only thus will her sacrifice be matched by your victory." The words fell heavy, yet they were not spoken in cruelty. They were a covenant, stern and deliberate, meant to guard both daughter and suitor from an unmeasured doom. Aragorn bowed his head, and though his spirit groaned under the weight of such a task, he did not refuse. He knew already that this would be asked of him, though hearing it aloud pressed the burden more firmly upon his shoulders. To reclaim two thrones, to heal kingdoms long divided, to lead against the shadow rising in the east. These were not tasks for any man, yet if he would win Arwen, he must attempt them, or else surrender his hope. When he departed from Elrond's chamber, the words echoed in him like tolling bells. His love, though steadfast, now bore the mark of an impossible condition. Yet he did not despair, for in the heart of every ranger lived patience, and in his blood flowed the endurance of Númenórean kings. He would walk the long road set before him, though its end lay beyond sight. Arwen knew, for Elrond spoke to her as well. He told her of the grief he had borne with Elros, and he begged her to consider the sorrow she would lay upon herself and upon him if she chose as her foremother Lúthien once had. He did not forbid her love, for he knew her heart was her own, but he pleaded with her to delay her choice until the hour of certainty. If he should fail, Elrond said softly, you will be left in bitterness, neither of elves nor wholly of men, caught in a twilight that holds no joy. Wait until the thrones are restored. Wait until his destiny is fulfilled. Only then may you bind your fate to his. Arwen listened, her eyes luminous, her face calm as still water. She loved her father and knew the truth of his wisdom. She felt also the ache of his foresight, for she understood that her choice would wound him deeply. Yet in her heart she was resolute. The likeness of Lúthien ran strong in her, and the strength to forsake what seemed eternal had awakened within her soul. She did not speak her decision aloud, not yet, but inwardly she knew it. She would bind herself to Aragorn, whatever the cost. For love was not a fleeting desire, but the weaving of her spirit with his. Still she honored her father's plea and waited, holding her choice as one holds a hidden flame. Thus Elrond's dilemma became the silent axis around which their lives turned. He could not prevent love from growing, but he could set the conditions that would test its endurance. For him it was both shield and sorrow, shield against a hasty union that would bring ruin, sorrow in that he foresaw he might one day lose his daughter forever. For Aragorn it became a vow, a trial by which his worth would be proven, and for Arwen it became the quiet crucible of patience, the long waiting through which her love would either wither or be perfected. The shards of Narsil remained upon their place, unreforged, as though waiting for the hour when condition and destiny would converge. And in the east the darkness stirred, gathering strength for the storm to come. Against that storm, Elrond had set his safeguard, not knowing whether it would preserve or destroy. Yet in the quiet halls of Rivendell, under the falling water and the endless stars, the threads of love, destiny, and sorrow had already been knotted together, and nothing thereafter could untangle them. The question lingered, silent yet inexorable. Would Aragorn's long years of wandering and his hidden strength prove enough to reclaim the thrones of men and meet the measure set before him? Or would love itself, like the light of the elves, fade into memory, a song of what might have been? Arwen and Aragorn walked beneath the fading leaves of Rivendell, the weight of choice pressing upon her like a mantle woven from both light and shadow. Her father's words still echoed in her mind, stern counsel, born not of cruelty but of love. Elrond had placed before Aragorn the condition of kingship, and before her the mirror of loss. To bind herself to a mortal man was to renounce the life of her people, to turn away from the west where her kin would sail, and to walk a road that ended in silence beneath the earth. Yet her heart, though heavy, was steadfast. She had looked upon Aragorn and seen not only the heir of Isildur, but the man who would bear her spirit in his keeping. Her decision, though still unspoken, had already been made. For Arwen, the likeness to Luthien was no passing resemblance. In her veins ran the memory of that first great union of elf and man, and she knew the price that had been paid. Luthien had chosen mortality for love of Beren, and though sorrow was her portion, the greatness of their deed endured through all ages. Now Arwen stood at the same threshold, the same perilous bridge between two fates. To choose Aragad was to choose grief, yet also to kindle hope for the world of men. To refuse him was to fade with her people untouched by death but bereft of love. Neither path was without loss. In secret, she spoke with Aragorn in the gardens where their hearts had first been revealed. The air was still, and the stars of Varda shone above, silent witnesses to their vow. Aragorn's face was grave, for he knew the demand placed upon him, the impossible labor of uniting Gondor and Arnor, of standing against the rising tide of Sauron. "I cannot ask this of you," he said, his voice low, "for the cost is too great. Your father speaks truly. My life is but a brief shadow beside yours. To bind yourself to me is to forsake all that your people hold eternal." But Arwen placed her hand upon his, her gaze steady, and she answered with words that seemed older than the stars themselves. "Do not speak to me of eternity, for love does not count its years. If I must choose the path of Luthien, then I choose it freely. Better to share your fleeting days than to wander endless ages without you. The light of the even star is not for myself alone, it is for you, and for the hope we will kindle together." Her voice, though soft, carried the power of certainty. In that moment she bound herself to him, though no ceremony marked it, no crown or ring sealed it. It was a choice of the spirit, unseen yet unbreakable. The echo of Mandos's halls stirred in her blood. the remembrance of Lúthien's song that had once swayed the doom of Arda. Arwen's choice was not less weighty, though quieter, spoken not before Valar, but before the listening stars. Yet she knew that her father's sorrow was real, and it pierced her heart even as her love deepened. For Elrond was wise beyond reckoning, and he foresaw the grief that would follow her. He would remain when she was gone, living on in the memory of her laughter while her body lay in mortal earth. She could not undo his pain, nor could she soften it with words. This knowledge became the hidden wound she carried, the price she paid even before her choice bore its final fruit. Time moved forward, and the world darkened. Rumors came of Sauron's growing strength, of shadows spreading from Mordor, of alliances forged in secret darkness. The long peace of Rivendell felt fragile, like a flame flickering before a storm. Arwen's decision did not falter, but it deepened in gravity. She knew now that her fate was not bound merely to Aragorn as a man, but to the destiny of Middle-earth itself. If he failed, ruin would come not only upon her heart, but upon the free peoples of the world. Her sacrifice would then be emptiness, her love a lament lost in the silence of defeat. Thus, she began to prepare herself inwardly for the long waiting. For Aragorn could not yet claim her hand. He must wander still, proving himself upon battlefields, beneath foreign skies, among peoples who did not know his name. She could not walk beside him on those roads, but she could wait, bearing in silence the knowledge that her life was already bound to his. She became a figure of stillness, the even star shining in Rivendell, her presence a quiet strength to those who saw her, though they did not know the depth of the choice already made. There were moments when doubt touched her, as shadows pass briefly across a bright surface. She would look upon her father's face and see the sorrow that lingered there, and her heart would ache. She would walk in the woods and hear the songs of her people, recalling that soon their voices would fade into the west, leaving her behind. She would dream of white shores, of light unbroken, of peace unmarred by decay, and she would awaken with tears upon her face, knowing she had turned from that path. Yet when morning came and the memory of Aragorn's eyes returned to her, she stood firm once more. Her choice was not made in ignorance, nor in haste. It was deliberate, shaped by love and by the knowledge of loss. In this, she became more than the daughter of Elrond, more than the likeness of Lúthien. She became the bridge between two destinies, a living symbol of twilight that yet bore the promise of dawn. Her sacrifice would be measured not only in her own years, but in the renewal of kingdoms, in the survival of free peoples, in the hope that would follow when the shadow was overthrown. Thus the even star shone, steady and unyielding, not in the brilliance of immortal light, but in the quiet endurance of a choice already sealed. She had bound herself to a mortal's fate, and though sorrow awaited her, she did not waver. Her love was not the fleeting flame of passion, but the deep, enduring fire that survives long winters and carries warmth into the coldest nights. Aragorn departed once more, to wander and to fight, carrying within him the strength of her vow. Arwen remained, the silent guardian of their bond, waiting through years that stretched like centuries. The halls of Rivendell echoed with music and counsel, but beneath it all lingered the tension of her choice, unspoken yet unalterable. And so the tale of their love moved forward, not yet crowned by victory, but already marked by sacrifice. Arwen's choice, though hidden, had set the course. She had bound herself to the fate of a man, and through him, to the fate of all Middle-earth. What remained was the proving of Aragorn himself, the reforging of his people, and the long test of whether love could indeed stand against shadow and despair. The next step in that long road lay not in Rivendell, but in the shards of a broken sword, waiting for the hour when they would be remade, and with them the destiny of the man who carried both love and kingdom upon his shoulders. The shards of Narsil lay long in quiet repose, their broken edges cold and mute beneath the watchful care of Elrond's house. For centuries they had remained untouched, fragments of a blade that had once severed the ring from the hand of Sauron. Yet in their silence there was a waiting, as if the steel itself knew that its story was not ended. When Aragorn returned from his years of wandering, hardened by exile and tested by countless roads, the moment came at last for the relic of his line to awaken. In Rivendell's deep forges, where smiths still labored with ancient skill, the shards were gathered and laid upon the anvil. The air grew heavy, for those who stood nearby felt that more than metal was being joined. It was the memory of ages reforged. Sparks flew as hammer struck steel, and the song of the smiths rose, mingling with echoes of Valinor's lost light. Each blow was a rhythm of destiny, binding the past to the future. Slowly the blade took form, whole once more, gleaming with a fire that seemed not only of forge, but of prophecy. Thus was Narsil remade, and it was named Andúril, Flame of the West. When the sword was placed into Aragorn's hands, the light of its edge shimmered across his face. He held it not as a possession, but as a trust renewed. In its weight he felt the burden of kingship, the call to heal what had long been broken. The blade sang with a voice that stirred his heart, reminding him of both Isildur's triumph and Isildur's failure. It was a weapon, yes, but more than that. It was a symbol, proof that what had been sundered could yet be restored. As he drew it forth, its light filled the hall, and those who saw it knew that the hidden heir had stepped nearer to his destiny. For Arwen, the sight of Andúril gleaming in Aragorn's hands was both hope and sorrow. She knew that the sword bound him to paths of war from which he might not return. Yet she also knew that without it, his claim could never be fulfilled. The reforging of the blade was as the sealing of her choice, for as Andúril carried the light of her people into the world of men, so too would she bind her immortal life to mortal fate. In the flame of that sword was reflected the flame of her love, steadfast and consuming, destined to shine against the gathering darkness. Word of the reforged blade spread swiftly, carried by whispers and by song. To the Dunedain it was a sign that their long exile was not in vain, that the line of kings would rise again. To the servants of the enemy was a tremor of fear, for they knew that the heir of Isildur now bore the weapon that once cut the ring from their master's hand. The world seemed to lean forward, poised upon the edge of change, as though even the stars watched more keenly to see what would follow. Aragorn himself felt the transformation. The years of wandering had taught him humility and endurance, but Andúril in his grasp reminded him of who he truly was. No longer merely Estel, the name of hidden hope, he began to walk openly in the stature of Ilisur, the Elfstone, though the crown was yet far from his brow. Each step he took carried the echo of the reforged steel, and his companions looked to him with new reverence. The sword was not only proof of lineage but proof of worth, for only a hand willing to bear its weight could wield it. Yet the reforging of Narsil did not end the burden, it deepened it. The blade demanded action, demanded that Aragorn stand forth against the shadow rising in the east. It was not a relic to be stored, but a flame to be carried into battle. Its light would not remain sheathed. It must be lifted before armies, its fire a standard of defiance. And Aragorn knew that by carrying it he declared openly who he was, and thereby drew upon himself the full attention of Sauron. No longer could he wander in secrecy. His path was now a road of peril, lit by the flame of his ancestor's sword. Elrond, in silence, watched the transformation. He had set the condition that only a king of Gondor and Arnor would be worthy of his daughter, and the reforging of Andúril was a step toward that crown. Yet it was also a step nearer to the grief he dreaded, for in Aragorn's hand he saw both the rise of kingdoms and the inevitable fading of Arwen's light. He said little, for the choice was beyond his power to unmake. He could only counsel and wait, as father and lord both. The sword gleamed, and the world moved closer to its hour of decision. In its light, Aragorn saw not only war and kingship, but Arwen's face. For her sake, he bore its weight without faltering, though he knew the road ahead would demand blood and sacrifice. Each time he looked upon the blade, he remembered her words in the garden, that she chose him freely, knowing the cost. And so Andúril became not merely a weapon of war, but a covenant between them, a symbol of love tested by sorrow and strengthened by endurance. Thus, the broken past was made whole, yet in its wholeness lay peril. For just as the blade shone bright, so too did the shadow deepen in Mordor. Sauron stirred, and his eye turned more fully toward the one who now bore the flame of the West. The reforging of Narsil was not only a herald of hope, but a summons to war. The time of secrecy was over. The time of open contest had come. And so Aragorn stepped forth, no longer a nameless ranger, but the bearer of a sword whose fire had not been seen since the last defeat of the Dark Lord. The path of wandering was at an end, and the path of kingship had begun. Yet even as he lifted the blade before his companions, he knew that this was only the beginning, and that the full trial lay still ahead, in fields not yet chosen, and battles not yet fought. The next chapter of his road would not be walked in forges or in hidden valleys, but upon the very stage of Middle-earth itself, where war would test the strength of his hand, the faith of his heart, and the hope of all who looked to him. The shadow lengthened across Middle-earth, and the whispers of war became a roar that none could ignore. Sauron's power gathered in Mordor, the Dark Tower crowned with fire and malice, and the eye turned ceaselessly, searching, commanding, summoning armies from every darkened land. In this hour, Aragorn bore Andúril upon his side, and stepped fully into the role that fate had long prepared for him. No longer could he remain as Thorongil, the hidden captain, nor as Estel, the foster son of Rivendell. Now he must take his place as leader of the Fellowship of the Ring, a company bound not by might or lineage, but by purpose, tasked with carrying the One Ring into the very heart of the enemy's land, to see it destroyed. In the house of Elrond the council had been held, where elves, men, dwarves, and hobbits debated what should be done. Aragorn had spoken little, but when his name and lineage were revealed, the truth could not be denied. The heir of Isildur was present, bearing the blade that had once cut the ring from Sauron's hand, and though the memory of Isildur's weakness weighed upon him, Aragorn accepted the charge laid before him, to guide Frodo Baggins, the ring-bearer, upon the perilous road to Mordor. Thus the fellowship was formed, and in their company, Aragorn's leadership was tested not in secrecy, but in the open gaze of all. The path was long and full of peril, from the snows of Caradhras to the black halls of Moria. Aragorn walked at the side of the ring-bearer, guiding, protecting, and enduring. The loss of Gandalf in the depths of Khazad-dûm struck them with grief, and in that hour it was Aragorn who steadied the company, bearing them onward when despair threatened to consume them. His voice was quiet but resolute, his will unyielding, and the others looked to him with growing trust. The years of wandering had not been wasted, for now his patience, his skill, and his endurance became the lifeline of the fellowship. Yet always, beneath his strength, he felt the weight of the unseen bond with Arwen. Her choice, though hidden from the world, was his secret fire. In the nights when fear pressed upon him, he would recall her words, spoken softly beneath Rivendell's stars, and her image shone before him as a light no shadow could consume. Though she was far away, her presence walked beside him, and in the silence of his heart he carried her as a standard brighter than Andúril itself. To his companions he was captain and guide. To himself he was a man walking each step with her memory at his side. Through the golden woods of Lothlorien the Fellowship found rest, and there Galadriel, Lady of the Golden Wood, looked upon Aragorn with eyes that pierced both past and future. She saw the bond between him and her granddaughter, and she knew the price that had been set. She did not speak against it, nor did she soften it, but she placed before Aragorn the vision of what might be, the crown upon his brow, the kingdom restored, and Arwen beside him as queen. Yet she also showed him the shadow that threatened to undo it all. From her words he gained neither comfort nor despair, but a clearer understanding of the road ahead. When the Fellowship broke at Amon Hen, scattered by the onslaught of Orc and Uruk-hai, Aragorn's path turned toward leadership of men. Frodo and Sam slipped away into the shadow of Mordor, but Merry and Pippin were taken captive, and Boromir fell beneath a storm of arrows. Aragorn knelt beside him as he died, and in that sorrow he heard again the weight of his task. Gondor, Boromir's beloved city, awaited not only a steward but a king. Yet Aragorn's heart, though torn by grief, did not falter. He took command, guiding Legolas and Gimli in pursuit of their captured friends, beginning the long hunt across the plains of Rohan. It was upon those plains that his leadership grew into something more than survival. The riders of Rohan, suspicious and proud, came upon him, and Aragorn spoke with them, not as a nameless wanderer, but as one who bore the blood of kings. His words carried weight, his bearing commanded respect, and even Éomer, proud marshal of the Riddermark, recognized in him a strength not easily gainsaid. The world of men, fractured and leaderless, began to look upon him as one who might yet bring unity. Through battle and pursuit, through weary miles and sudden peril, Aragorn carried the Fellowship's broken purpose. Yet within him, the question remained, would his strength prove enough, not only against the armies of Sauron, but against the deeper shadow of doubt? For each time he lifted Andúril, each time he named himself as Isildur's heir, he knew the enemy's eye turned more keenly toward him. It was a dangerous mantle to bear, one that invited doom as well as hope. Still, he endured. His love for Arwen sustained him, her choice echoing through every trial. In moments of despair, he would think of the banner she had promised, a gift not yet delivered, and he felt as though her unseen hand steadied his. He carried within him not only the duty of kingship, but the quiet strength of a vow sealed beneath the stars of Rivendell. This hidden covenant gave him a resilience that no wound could break, no shadow could diminish. Thus the shadow of Sauron grew, but so too did the stature of Aragorn. No longer merely a ranger among exiles, he became a figure upon whom the hopes of many rested. Elves, dwarves, and men alike began to see in him the reflection of what had been lost, a king not by demand, but by endurance and service. Yet the trial was not ended. The true test still lay ahead, when his hand would need to wield Andúril openly, and his claim would be measured not by lineage alone, but by the courage with which he stood against the storm. The War of the Ring had only begun, and Aragorn's part in it was still unfolding. The Fellowship was scattered, kingdoms trembled, and the darkness in Mordor reached ever outward. Yet amid the gathering storm, Aragorn carried with him the memory of Arwen, the Evenstar whose choice had bound her fate to his. Her love was not distant to him. It was the unseen light by which he walked, and as he pressed onward into shadow, the thought of her steadied his hand and quieted his fear, reminding him that even in the blackest night, there remained a flame that no darkness could extinguish. The road ahead would lead to battles greater than any he had yet faced, to fields where the fate of nations would be decided. But before the clash of armies, before the crowning of kings, there would come a gift from Arwen herself, a gift that would carry him through despair and remind him that hope once kindled cannot be quenched. Far away from the marches of Rohan and the weary chase of Aragorn, there stirred in Rivendell a quiet act of love that would cross leagues of darkness and years of waiting. Arwen Aragorn, the even star of her people, looked upon the path that her beloved had taken, and though she could not walk beside him, she resolved to send him a gift that would stand as a token of her faith. Long had she labored in silence, weaving with her own hands a banner unlike any other, wrought with symbols of kingship and destiny. Upon the field of black she embroidered the white tree of Gondor, its 7 stars arrayed above, and the crown of Elendil shining at its heart. It was not merely cloth, but a proclamation stitched with hope, a sign that the line of kings would rise again, and that Aragorn, son of Arathorn, would sit upon the throne of men. Each thread she wove carried the weight of her choice. In the hall where others sang of departure and longed for the white shores of Valinor, Arwen bent her will toward Middle-earth, for she had chosen not to follow her kin into the west, but to remain and bind her fate to the mortal king yet to come. The banner was her covenant, silent and steadfast, a flame of faith carried not in word but in symbol. When at last it was finished, she entrusted it to those who would bring it to him at the appointed hour, though neither she nor he yet knew when that moment of unveiling would arrive. Meanwhile, Aragorn pressed onward through the trials of war. The fields of Rohan tested him, the hearts of men weighed him, and the eyes of the enemy searched ever more keenly for his rising strength. Andúril shone at his side, a sword of flame reforged, yet in his heart there were times when doubt whispered. The burden laid upon him by Elrond's condition was heavy, for victory was not assured, and each battle carried the risk of ruin. He knew the strength of Sauron, the endless legions bred in shadow, and he measured them against his own slender company. At times he wondered if his claim was folly, if he was but a man out of place, carrying hopes too great for his mortal hands. It was in those hours that the thought of Arwen's faith returned to him. Though he had not yet seen her banner, he felt it waiting, a presence as real as the steel he carried. He remembered her words beneath the stars, that she had chosen him freely, not as a passing affection but as the shaping of her destiny. That knowledge was his unseen shield, guarding his heart when despair would creep close, for in her love he found a certainty deeper than lineage, a strength more enduring than arms. If she, who could have dwelt eternally beyond the circles of the world, had chosen to share his fleeting days, then he could not falter. Her sacrifice demanded his courage, her faith demanded his endurance. The battles pressed on. Helm's Deep rose in storm and fire, the night broken by the cries of countless orcs. Aragorn fought with fury, rallying the men of Rohan when hope seemed lost. His voice carried over the din, not merely as that of a captain, but as one whose presence turned despair into defiance. Yet even there, amid the clash of steel and the roar of war, his thoughts strayed toward Arwen. He felt her hand upon his spirit, steadying him when the weight of darkness threatened to drive him into despair. She was not present, yet she was nearer to him than the breath upon his lips, her choice binding her to every stroke of his sword. When the dawn broke and the battle was won, Aragorn knew that the war was far from ended. Sauron's power was not diminished, only delayed, and Gondor still stood vulnerable beneath the shadow. The weight of kingship pressed upon him more heavily than ever. To claim the throne, he must not only wield the sword, but prove himself worthy before all peoples. And in that knowledge, the unseen banner grew in importance. For the day would come when it must be revealed, when its symbols would not only proclaim his heritage, but declare to the world that hope had not abandoned men. Arwen, far away, continued to wait. She had no certainty of his safety, no tidings of his deeds save what rumor carried. Yet her heart remained steady, for her choice had not been made upon conditions of triumph or peace, but upon love itself. She knew the peril of his road, and she knew the sorrow it would bring her if he fell, but she also knew that her banner, when lifted, would bear her spirit into battle, a silent companion beside him. In that thought she found her strength. She did not fight with sword or shield, yet her gift was no less powerful, for it bore the quiet fire of faith that can move nations. Thus the gift of hope was prepared, though its hour had not yet come. Aragorn carried within him the certainty of it, even unseen, as though the banner were already unfurled above him. In times of weariness he imagined its stars gleaming against the night, its crown shining as a promise of renewal. The unseen gift became a talisman in his heart, reminding him that he did not walk alone. The war would grow darker still, and the eyes of Sauron would fix upon him with greater fury. Yet when despair threatened, Aragorn recalled the Evenstar's choice, and in that memory he found strength to press on. For love, when joined with sacrifice, is a weapon that no darkness can fully conquer. The banner, though hidden, was already at work, binding him to his destiny, reminding him that kingship was not merely inheritance, but the fulfillment of a covenant between mortal and immortal, man and woman, past and future. And so, as the shadow of Mordor stretched across the lands, Aragorn bore the unseen banner within his heart, waiting for the moment when its light would be revealed. That moment would come, not in quiet halls, but in the midst of war, when hope itself seemed lost. Then Arwen's gift would unfurl, and the flame of the West would burn brighter than fear. For in that banner was woven more than symbols of kingship. It bore the love of an immortal who chose mortality, and in its unveiling the world would glimpse not only the destiny of a man, but the triumph of hope against despair. The world reeled toward its breaking point, and the War of the Ring unfurled across plains, mountains, and cities with a fury unseen since the Elder Days. Sauron's will, sharpened like a blade, drove countless hosts against the free peoples, and each kingdom was tested as though the foundations of Arda itself trembled. Into this crucible Aragorn strode, Anduril bright at his side, his every step now bound to the promise of kingship. The battles that followed were more than contests of steel. They were reckonings of endurance, faith, and the fragile hope that clung to Middle-earth like a flame flickering in storm. At Helm's Deep, the night howled with the cries of 10,000 Uruk-hai. The walls shuddered under fire and iron, and the men of Rohan fought with desperation, pressed against ruin. Aragorn moved among them like a beacon, his voice lifting above the chaos, his sword striking with relentless purpose. Where despair gnawed at the hearts of the defenders, he spoke courage, reminding them that dawn would come. He fought not as one seeking glory, but as one who knew that each man beside him was a brother, whose survival might carry hope into another day. Though the battle raged with hopeless odds, the dawn broke with unexpected deliverance, the arrival of Gandalf and the riders scattering the horde. Yet even in victory, Aragorn felt the weight of the war pressing heavier, for each triumph seemed only a reprieve before a darker storm. The tide rolled onward to Gondor. There, upon the fields of Pelennor, the greatest clash of the age erupted. The hosts of Mordor blackened the land, their numbers endless, their fury driven by Sauron's command. The city of Minas Tirith, proud and white, stood as the last bastion of men, its walls battered by siege engines, and its gates shattered by the dread hammer Grom. In that hour, all seemed lost, until Anduril's flame was seen. Aragorn came with the strength of the dead fulfilled in oath, and the armies of the living at his side. His presence was like a thunderclap, and the hearts of men near to breaking rose again with new fire. On that field he proved not only his lineage, but his leadership. He rallied the scattered, steadied the faint, and stood unflinching against the terror of the Nazgul. The black wings shrieked above, but Aragorn's gaze did not falter. He knew that his strength was not his alone. Arwen's unseen banner burned in his heart, and her faith steadied him as no armor could. Through the smoke and carnage, he bore himself as one already crowned, though the crown itself was not yet upon his brow. The victory upon Pelennor was great, but dearly bought, and Aragorn knew it was not the end. The true test lay still before them, beyond all reckoning, in the very land of shadow itself. For though Sauron's armies had been broken in part, the Dark Lord's power was unspent. The eye burned fiercer, and its malice turned wholly toward the one who now revealed himself as heir of kings. Aragorn felt its weight pressing upon his spirit, an invisible war of will as perilous as any clash of blades. Yet he did not yield, for he knew the ring-bearer still carried the burden that alone could end this darkness. To aid him, Aragorn resolved upon a desperate gamble, to march openly upon Mordor, to draw the eye to himself and give Frodo a chance to slip unnoticed into the fire of Mount Doom. It was not merely courage but sacrifice, for such a march seemed certain death, yet he accepted it without hesitation, for his love and his kingship both demanded that he stand in the breach. The host of the West was gathered, diminished though it was. Ragged companies of Gondor and Rohan, weary from battles already fought, yet stood willing to follow him. Before them Aragorn spoke words of quiet strength, not with fiery speeches or promises of ease, but with calm resolve. He did not deny the peril, nor soften the truth. Yet he turned their gaze to the hope that still remained. "We cannot command victory," he told them, "but we may command our courage, and in our courage lies the hope of all free peoples." His voice carried through the ranks like a steadying hand, and they followed him willingly, not because they thought survival assured, but because they trusted the man who walked before them. Thus they marched to the Black Gate, the very threshold of Mordor. The land grew barren, the air thick with dread, and the sky darkened as though night had swallowed day. Before them loomed the towers and iron doors of the Morinnan, vast and unyielding. The ground shook with the tread of Sauron's hosts as they poured forth, a sea of malice stretching farther than sight. Yet amid that horror, Aragorn rode forward, Anduril in hand, its flame shining defiantly against the darkness. No terror could quench it, for it carried within it the memory of a broken sword made whole, and the vow of a man made king. At the edge of despair, when the armies of Mordor seemed about to engulf them, Aragorn lifted his gaze, and his voice rang clear. He named himself not only as son of Arathorn, but as Elessar, heir of Elendil, bearer of Anduril, flame of the West. The name carried across the field, and for a heartbeat even the shadow seemed to pause, as though destiny itself held its breath. Behind him, the weary host of the West found courage they had not known they still possessed. They lifted their swords not in hope of life, but in defiance of despair, willing to stand and fall if it meant the chance for Frodo to fulfill his task. Thus the battle before the Black Gate was joined, not with the expectation of triumph, but with the dignity of sacrifice. Aragorn fought at the forefront, Anduril cleaving through ranks of shadow, his presence unyielding even as the tide of enemies crashed upon them. Each stroke of his blade was more than steel. It was a declaration that love and hope endure beyond the reach of darkness. For within him, Arwen's choice still burned, the knowledge that she had bound her eternity to his mortal span. That gift lent him a strength beyond measure, and though he stood upon the brink of annihilation, he did not falter. The world turned upon a knife's edge. Behind the clash of armies, unseen and alone, Frodo bore the ring toward its fiery end. Yet it was Aragorn who held the gaze of Sauron, who carried the weight of the enemy's wrath upon his shoulders. In his defiance lay the sliver of chance that the quest required. Thus his love, his kingship, and his sacrifice converged in one final stand, as the War of the Ring reached its fiercest hour. And though he did not yet know it, the choice he and Arwen had made, sealed in gardens and in silence, had borne its fruit upon the battlefield. For without her faith, his hand might have faltered. Without his courage, her choice would have withered. Together, though apart, they bore the hope of the world. And in the end, it was that hope, more than armies or swords, that turned the tide of history. The shadow of Mordor was broken, the ring unmade in the fire from which it had first been wrought. Sauron's tower fell, the black host scattered, and the air of Middle-earth seemed to breathe again after long suffocation. Yet victory did not come as the triumph of warriors upon a field, but as the quiet endurance of a burden borne to its bitter end by the smallest of hands. When the eye was quenched and the earth trembled, Aragorn stood amid the ruins of the Blackgate, his sword still bright with defiance, and he knew that the age of fear had passed. Yet in that stillness after storm, he also knew that his true trial was only beginning. For victory in war must give birth to renewal in peace, and in that renewal his destiny would be sealed before all. The armies of the West, though scarred and weary, lifted their voices in wonder. They looked upon Aragorn not only as the captain who had led them to the brink of doom, but as the man who had stood firm against despair itself. The fire of Andúril reflected in their eyes, and they saw in him the long-lost kinship of men returned. Yet Aragorn did not claim it swiftly. His heart was humble, for he knew that kinship was not seized but bestowed, not earned by lineage alone, but by service, sacrifice, and love. He guided the wounded back to safety. He gave honor to the fallen, and he turned his first strength not to thrones or crowns, but to healing. Thus it was that he came to Minas Tirith, the white city still scarred from siege and flame. The towers were cracked, the stones blackened with fire, and the people wandered in sorrow for those they had lost. In the high houses of healing, Aragorn bent his will to restore the wounded, for in his hands lay a gift of the old kings, the gift of healing through Athilas. Quietly, without proclamation, he tended the broken, and the whispers of the city spread. The hands of the king are the hands of a healer, the people said, and so shall the rightful king be known. In this, Aragorn's kingship was confirmed not by sword nor by conquest, but by compassion. When the day of coronation at last arrived, the air of Gondor was filled with light. The white walls shone newly cleansed, banners of silver and sable hung in the wind, and the bells rang as they had not rung for centuries. Upon the great stair before the gates, the people gathered, their eyes lifted toward the man who would ascend as king. Aragorn stood there in simple raiment, Andúril sheathed at his side, his gaze steady but humble. It was not in his own hand that he took the crown, but in the hand of the steward who had borne Gondor's burden through darkness. Faramir, son of Denethor, knelt and held forth the crown of Elendil, gleaming with ancient memory. "Receive now the crown of your fathers," he said, "and be king of this realm renewed." But Aragorn answered softly, "By the will of the people, and by the faith of all free folk, shall the crown be bestowed. Let the hand of the ring-bearer bring it to me. For by his suffering we are delivered." And so Frodo, small and weary, lifted the crown into Aragorn's hands, and with that gesture the circle of fate was complete. Upon his brow the crown was set, and the voices of Gondor rose in thunder. "Behold the King Elessar, Flame of the West, bearer of hope." The cry echoed across the city, and it seemed as though the very stones, long bowed under shadow, answered with joy. Yet the coronation was not only a moment for Aragorn, for into the city, radiant as morning, came Arwen and Aragorn, the even star, clad in white and silver, her hair flowing like dark rivers beneath the sunlight. She had chosen her path and now walked it to its fulfillment, her father's sorrow and her people's departure lying behind her like a closed door. As she entered Minas Tirith, it seemed to all who beheld her that the light of the elves had come to dwell one final time among men. She walked with serenity, but her eyes were fixed upon Aragorn, and in them shone the culmination of long waiting and long love. Before the assembled throngs they met, and Aragorn's hand took hers. No words were needed, for all had been spoken long before, in gardens and in silence, in vows whispered beneath stars. Yet now their union was not hidden, but declared before the world. The Evenstar became queen, her light bound to the destiny of men, and the people looked upon them with awe, sensing that in their love lay not only joy but the promise of renewal for an age weary of war. In that hour, Elrond too was present, grave and sorrowful, yet dignified. He placed his daughter's hand into Aragorn's with a heart heavy as stone, knowing the grief that would one day come, yet also seeing the hope she had chosen to bring. He did not speak, for no words could soften the wound within him, but his presence sealed the covenant. He had given his daughter not lightly, but with the knowledge that her choice would shape the fate of the world. The days that followed were filled with rejoicing. Songs rose in the streets, feasts were held in honor of the fallen, and the city was clothed anew in banners and flowers. Yet amid the celebrations Aragorn and Arwen found quiet moments, walking together through gardens still fragrant despite the scars of war. Their love was no longer a secret vow or a hidden flame. It was the light by which the kingdom itself was rekindled. The people spoke of them not only as king and queen, but as a sign that the age of men had truly begun, blessed by a union that bridged the ancient divide between mortal and immortal. Still, beneath the joy, the shadow of cost lingered. Arwen knew that she had turned her back upon the undying shores, and though her choice was steadfast, she could not escape the knowledge of its sorrow. She saw her father preparing for departure, his eyes filled with grief, and she felt the ache of the parting to come. Yet she did not waver, for her choice was not for endless life, but for love that gave life its meaning. Beside Aragorn she found peace, even amid the knowledge of mortality. Thus the coronation of King Elessar was more than the restoration of a throne. It was the sealing of a covenant long prepared, a union of love and kingship that gave new strength to a weary world. The White City, scarred by siege, shone again with promise, and the hearts of men lifted as though dawn had broken after endless night. And in the midst of that light, the Evenstar walked at the king's side, her presence a living reminder that love, freely chosen and dearly kept, could alter the fate of nations. The world entered a new age that day, and though its years would carry both triumph and sorrow, the crowning of Aragorn and the coming of Arwen stood as a moment when history itself paused, and all who lived beheld the wonder of love fulfilled, a promise made flesh before the eyes of men. The White City shone with banners and song, but beyond its walls the tide of time pressed on, inexorable and unsparing. The elves began their slow departure, their ships slipping silently from the grey havens toward the shores of the west, where no mortal might follow. It was then that the fullness of Arwen's choice began to take shape, for though she was queen beside Aragorn, beloved of her people and radiant in her place, she was now bound to mortality. The light of her kindred that had once seemed timeless in her eyes began to soften into the shadow of human years. She had laid aside eternity for love, and with each passing season she felt the cost more keenly. In the halls of Minas Tirith she dwelt in dignity, her presence a blessing to the realm. She was gracious to her people, tender to the wounded, a quiet strength in times of trial. Yet within her heart she bore a wound that no crown could ease, Her father had departed, bearing her mother and her kin into the west, leaving her behind forever. That sundering was sharper than any blade. When she stood upon the walls at night and looked westward, she felt the ache of a silence that would never lift, for she knew she would never again see the faces that had nurtured her through uncounted centuries. She had chosen Aragorn freely, but her choice was also a parting that could not be mended. Aragorn perceived the sorrow in her, though she cloaked it in serenity. He loved her all the more for the strength with which she bore it. Yet his heart, too, was pierced by the knowledge of what she had surrendered. He wished that he could lift her burden, that he could grant her both his love and the undying life of her kin. But such things were not given to men. What he could offer he gave unstintingly: his devotion, his companionship, and the kingdom they built together. Under their reign, Gondor was renewed, the fields restored, justice tempered with mercy, and hope rekindled among its people. Yet beneath every joy lay the shadow of her sacrifice, a reminder that every triumph of their rule was purchased at the price of her immortality. The years unfolded, golden and sorrowful, together. The white tree blossomed anew in the courts of Minas Tirith, a symbol of life restored, and the kingdom of Arnor was reunited with Gondor, fulfilling at last the dream of ages. Children were born to them, carrying forward both the line of kings and the legacy of Lúthien. For a time Arwen's heart knew deep contentment, watching her sons and daughters grow, seeing in their faces both her own kin and Aragorn's strength. Yet even then the passing of years did not relent. Her children would inherit the fate of men, and though they carried elven grace in their blood, their lives too would be mortal. The undying light of the Eldar was fading from the world, and she, the even star, had chosen to fade with it. At times she walked alone through the gardens, where the fountains whispered and the moonlight fell upon marble stone. There she remembered Rivendell, the silver light upon the Brunnen, her father's voice, the songs of her people. A great silence lay upon her when she recalled it, for all those voices were now across the sea, unreachable. And though her love for Aragorn was unshaken, the loss of that ancient music weighed upon her spirit. Yet she did not falter. She bore the grief as one bears the shadow of a crown, with dignity, with resolve, and with love that outlasts sorrow. Aragorn too aged, though more slowly than most men, for the blood of Númenor still lingered in his veins, yet his face grew lined with the years of rule, and his hair silvered as the seasons turned. Arwen saw in him the approach of the fate she had chosen, and though her heart ached, she did not turn from it. She had bound herself to him not only for the triumph of their youth, but for the waning of their days. She sat beside him in council. She walked with him upon the walls, and she bore his hand in hers as their strength together waned. When emissaries from distant lands came to pay homage, they beheld not only a king of power, but a queen of otherworldly beauty, who seemed at once mortal and beyond mortal. Her presence was a reminder that the old world of elves had touched the new age of men, and that love could bridge even the gulf of eternity. Yet those who were wise also saw in her eyes the sorrow of one who had chosen loss, and they marveled at her endurance. For in her was reflected the truth that every love bears its price, and that the measure of devotion is not found in ease, but in sacrifice. The land prospered beneath their reign, yet the turning of years could not be stayed. The elves were gone, the dwarves withdrew to their halls, and the dominion of men spread across Middle-earth. Arwen watched as the age of her people dwindled into memory, until she alone remained, the last great daughter of elves dwelling among mortals. The songs of the firstborn faded from the earth, and her heart grew heavy with the silence left behind. Yet she endured, for Aragorn was with her, and in his presence the grief was softened, if never fully healed. As their reign lengthened, tales were told of their love across every corner of the realm. To the people, They were not only sovereigns but a living story, the fulfillment of a prophecy older than memory. Yet those tales, though filled with joy, rarely spoke of the cost. Few understood how deeply Arwen had suffered the parting from her kin, or how heavily the years pressed upon her. She bore it silently, for to speak of it was to risk weakening the gift she had given freely. Instead, she wove her sorrow into love, and by that alchemy, she transformed her grief into strength for others. Thus the price of immortality forsaken revealed itself not in a single moment of agony, but in the quiet unfolding of years. It was the ache of absence, the silence of lost voices, the knowledge that she would fade while her people sailed into eternal light. Yet she did not repent her choice. For every sorrow she had also known joy, the joy of love fulfilled, of children born, of kingdoms restored, of walking beside Aragorn through the long twilight of the Third Age into the dawn of the Fourth. And so the tale of Arwen and Aragorn became both light and shadow, triumph and lament. She was the even star, shining at the dusk of her people's time, choosing to fall with night rather than sail into eternal dawn. Her fate was heavy, but it was hers, freely chosen, and through it the world of men was renewed. Yet even in her strength, the question lingered. What would become of her when Aragorn's last day came, when the man for whom she had forsaken eternity was taken by the fate of men? That answer lay still ahead, and its shadow already stretched toward her, unseen by the rejoicing of the realm, but felt in the quiet chambers of her heart. The twilight of their reign came softly, with the passing of many years as shadows lengthened across the world, and the footsteps of time grew heavy upon them both. Aragorn, though he had ruled long in wisdom and strength, could no longer conceal the weight of mortal years. His hair, once dark as the forests of his youth, had turned to silver. His face, once stern and unlined, bore the gentle traces of age. Yet his eyes still held the steady fire of kingship, and his hand still bore the strength of justice. In his presence the White City remained steadfast, its people secure, its walls crowned with prosperity. But to Arwen, who had chosen this fate, each line upon his face was a reminder of the path she had embraced. Every day of joy was also a step nearer to parting. In the high chambers of Minas Tirith, they walked together often in silence, their bond deeper than words, their love unshaken though tempered by grief. Arwen had long since accepted that her people were gone, that no ship remained to bear her to the undying lands. The choice she had made was sealed beyond recall, and now she began to taste its final consequence, for her beloved's time drew near, and she could not turn aside from it. Though Aragorn carried the long life of Númenor in his blood, his years too were numbered. She saw the quiet resolve growing in him, the acceptance that the gift of men was not a curse, but an end freely embraced. When the hour came, Aragorn's heart remained steadfast, even as his body grew weary. He ruled not with fear of death, but with the calm knowledge that his work was fulfilled. He had brought Gondor and Arnor into union, restored the White Tree, healed the rift of centuries, and given peace to lands long scarred by war. The crown weighed lightly upon him in his final years, for he bore it not as a burden, but as a trust that he had kept faithfully. Yet he knew that the time of his departure was near, and he prepared himself with the same dignity with which he had faced every trial of his life. It was in the silent chamber of the House of Kings that Aragorn at last spoke his farewell. He summoned Arwen, and his words were gentle, though his voice carried the finality of mortal truth. "The time is come," he said, "for me to lay aside the crown and pass into the realm beyond the circles of the world. I have ruled as long as my years allow, and I will not cling to life when the gift of men is offered." His eyes, though dimmed by age, shone still with love as he looked upon her. "I have been blessed beyond measure, for you chose to walk beside me. Through your love, I have known joy greater than any king before me, and though I go now to a place where you cannot follow, I do not fear, for our love has shaped the world, and in that it will endure." Arwen heard his words, and her heart broke with a pain deeper than any she had yet endured. She had borne the loss of her people, the silence of their departure, and the slow ache of years passing among mortals. But now she faced the final sundering, the loss of the man for whom she had forsaken immortality. No tears could ease it, no song could lessen its weight. She held his hand as if to bind him still to life, but she knew she could not. The choice she had made so long ago in Rivendell now reached its end, and she was left to bear the full cost. In that last hour, Aragorn lay upon his bed, the crown of Gondor set aside, the scepter of Annúminas resting still. His people gathered in silence, their hearts heavy with sorrow, but he spoke no lament. Instead he blessed them, bidding them keep the peace he had labored to secure. Then he turned to Arwen once more, and with a final breath he whispered, "Behold, we are not bound forever by the circles of this world. Beyond them we may yet meet again." And with those words he surrendered his spirit, embracing the gift of men, departing with dignity into silence. The chamber grew still, the light falling softly upon his face, serene in death. The king was gone, and with him passed an age of glory. The people of Gondor wept, yet they remembered his words and the strength of his reign. They laid him to rest in honor beneath the stones of his forefathers, the white tree blooming above, its blossoms falling like tears upon the tomb. Songs were sung, but no song could capture the depth of loss felt in that moment. For Arwen, the world had become hollow. The city still shone, her children still lived, the kingdom still flourished, but her heart was bereft. The light of her love, which had carried her through centuries of waiting, through war and sorrow, through triumph and kingship, was gone. She did not repent her choice, for she had loved Aragorn with a love that bore the weight of eternity, but now the emptiness of mortality settled upon her. She could not remain in Minas Tirith, where every stone spoke of him, where every hall echoed with his memory. The walls that had once sheltered joy became prisons of grief. She turned her steps at last toward Lorien, the land of her mother's kin, though it stood now silent and empty. The woods were fading, the voices of the Galadrim long departed, the golden leaves falling without song. There, in the withered glades of Corus Galadon, Arwen laid herself down. No sound of harp greeted her, no voice of kindred soothed her, only the silence of a world that had passed beyond her reach. Alone beneath the trees that once had glowed with eternal light, she lingered until the last of her strength was spent. Thus the even star, who had shone with the beauty of her people, passed away in solitude. Her body lay upon the hill where once her kin had gathered, and the forest received her in quiet mourning. No ship bore her across the sea, no immortal song bore her spirit to the west. She shared the fate of men fully, as she had chosen, and her name lived in memory as the last great link between immortal grace and mortal courage. In the hearts of her children and in the songs of her people, the tale of Arwen and Aragorn endured. It was sung as a story of love that defied shadow, of sacrifice freely chosen, of hope that carried the world through its darkest hour. Yet those who sang also knew it was a tale of grief, of choices that bore weight beyond imagining. It was both triumph and lament, both dawn and twilight. And so their story came to its close, not in splendor but in quiet, as all mortal tales must. The love of Arwen and Aragorn had changed Middle-earth, weaving together the threads of elves and men, of light and shadow, of eternity and time. Their legacy was a kingdom renewed, but more than that, it was a testament to the power of love, love that accepts loss, love that gives without counting the cost, love that shines even as it fades. Thus the even star fell, and the king of men passed, but their story lived on in the hearts of all who remembered, and in that remembrance they endured beyond the circles of the world, where perhaps, as Aragorn had whispered, love might find its meeting once again. Long after their passing, the tale of Aragorn and Arwen endured, woven into the memory of kingdoms and whispered in the songs of wandering minstrels. Their love was no longer a living flame upon the earth, but a light remembered echoing through halls and over plains, where once their footsteps had passed. Gondor flourished beneath the rule of their children, the line of kings unbroken, the white tree blooming as a sign that hope had not failed. Yet always, amid prosperity and triumph, there lingered the shadow of a story older than any crown, the choice of the even star, who forsook eternity for love, and of the king who bore the gift of men with grace. In the courts of Minas Tirith, scholars and singers alike preserved their memory. They spoke of Aragorn Elessar, the healer king, who led men through the last darkness and restored their strength. They spoke of Arazun Domiel, fairest of the elves, whose beauty was likened to Lúthien's, and whose choice bound her forever to the mortal world. Children grew hearing of their union, and though the details shifted with time, the heart of the tale remained, that love, when chosen with full knowledge of its price, can change the destiny of all peoples. Their story became more than history. It became parable, a quiet reminder that every joy bears its shadow, and every sacrifice its enduring fruit. The lands beyond Gondor too remembered them. In Rohan, riders told of the king who had stood with them in the night of Helm's Deep, when hope was a flickering ember. In the north, the Dunedain recalled the chieftain who returned them as king, lifting them from obscurity into honor. Even among the elves who yet dwelt in fading woods, the memory of Arwen's choice was carried with mingled sorrow and awe. They knew she had turned from the light of the west, and though they mourned her absence, they did not forget the beauty of her sacrifice. In her they saw the last echo of their kindred's bond with men, a bond that had shaped the world's fate since the elder days. But memory is a fragile vessel, shaped by time. In years long after their children's reign had passed, and their grandchildren's as well, the tale of Aragorn and Arwen softened into legend. The details grew hazy, the edges blurred, and their love was told with the dreamlike distance of myth. To some, Arwen became a symbol of twilight, the even star, who fell with the night. To others, Aragorn was remembered as a figure of inexhaustible strength, the warrior king, whose hand never trembled. Yet beneath these adornments of legend, a truer story remained, carried quietly in the hearts of the wise, that they were not distant figures of perfection, but two souls who bore together the weight of choice, enduring both joy and sorrow without turning aside. And so the story was sung by firesides, and in quiet chambers, where listeners leaned close to hear of the garden in Rivendell, where love was first spoken, of the broken sword reforged, of the banner woven in secrecy, of the battles endured, and of the crown laid upon a brow not seized, but received with humility. Each telling ended with the parting of Arwen and Aragorn, the sundering that lay heavy upon all who heard. Yet even that sorrow did not end the tale in despair. For always, the song lingered on Aragorn's final words to Arwen, that beyond the circles of the world they might meet again. In that hope, faint and unprovable, the story closed, leaving silence that was not emptiness but reverence. In the ages that followed, Middle-earth changed. The elves departed fully, their voices fading into memory. The dwarves retreated into their halls, and the dominion of men spread until it covered every land. Great towers rose, kingdoms waxed and waned, and the world took shapes that Aragorn and Arwen could never have imagined. Yet through all transformations, their tale remained, woven into the fabric of history like a thread of silver through darker cloth. It was retold not only as a record of what once had been, but as a guide, a lamp for those who faced choices of their own. For some who heard, it was the story of fidelity, teaching that love demands endurance through sorrow as much as through joy. For others, it was the story of kingship, reminding rulers that greatness lies not in conquest but in service, healing, and sacrifice. And for still others, it was the story of mortality itself, the gift of men, feared by many, yet accepted by Aragorn as a blessing. Through Arwen's eyes, it became also the story of grief, that to love mortals is to accept loss, yet to accept it willingly is to taste the fullness of life. In this way, the memory of their love became not only a crown for Gondor, but a song for the whole of Middle-earth. Even as the centuries turned, and the details of wars and treaties were forgotten, the Evenstar and the king endured in the minds of men. They were remembered at twilight, when the stars began to shine, and in springtime when the blossoms of the white trees scattered across the courts of stone. They were remembered by lovers who pledged themselves in gardens, by rulers who swore to serve their people, and by wanderers who gazed westward at sunset and wondered what lay beyond the circles of the world. Thus the tale did not die with them. It lived, reshaped, but never erased, a reminder that love can defy despair, that sacrifice can bring renewal, and that mortality itself need not be darkness, when embraced with dignity and hope. The Evenstar had fallen, but her light remained in memory. The king had laid aside his crown, but his reign endured in the legacy of peace. Together their story became one of the great chords in the music of history, a harmony of sorrow and joy that echoed long after their voices were stilled. And perhaps, as some whispered, their tale was not ended even then. For though none can say what lies beyond the circles of the world, there lingers a hope that in some realm beyond mortal sight, the Evenstar and the king walk together still, hand in hand, their love unbroken by the passage of time. That hope, faint as starlight, became the quiet promise carried in every retelling. For it is in hope that songs endure, and in love that even endings find their completion. So the tale of Arwen and Aragorn closed as all mortal stories must, yet it did not fade. It remained luminous and sorrowful, like the last light upon the horizon at dusk, lingering, haunting, beautiful. And in that light, those who came after found both comfort and challenge to love deeply, to endure faithfully, and to accept both the joy and the grief that every choice may bring. In this, their story transcended time, becoming not merely a record of what was, but a mirror held to the hearts of all who would hear it. Thus it is told still, when night falls and stars kindle in the sky, that the Evenstar once walked among men, and that a king once bore the weight of the world with grace. And though their bodies are long since dust, their love remains, a flame unquenched, a song unended, echoing in the silence, awaiting that place beyond the world where all stories meet again.